All right. So welcome to the webinar today, Introduction to Design Thinking, Encouraging Insightful Innovation Using Design Thinking and Human-Centered Design. My name is Karen Larson and I work for the Discovery Partners Institute, which is a division of the University of Illinois system. DPI is one of two partner organizations working on TechReady Illinois, which is hosting the webinar today. Before we get into the main portion of the webinar, let me tell you a little bit about TechReady. So DPI had originally planned to launch their workforce development initiative work later in 2021. Then COVID-19 came along and everything sort of went crazy. So with so many people unemployed across the state and across the country, we knew that we needed to do what we could right away. So we partnered with another local organization called P33 and launched TechReady in early June. TechReady is focused on increasing the availability and access to training programs in high demand tech fields. In many of our programs, we offer certificates, and in some of the programs, we also offer a student experience that includes a study groups, coaching, and projects. We've curated the entire program with leading employer-driven input. We've grouped all of the programs into 4 learning tracks. That includes data analytics, cloud computing, software development, and cybersecurity. Altogether, we have 10 providers delivering over 20 programs. I think we're up to about 24 now and have a couple more that are going to be coming online very shortly. They run from introductory level, skill level to advanced, and from a full weekend to 32 weeks of learning, and from free to several $1,000s for a full certificate. To learn more, you can visit us at techreadyillinois.com. So now let's get into the subject matter at hand. While the word design is often thought of as largely an artistic or engineering endeavor, there's a way of looking at the world that understands almost everything can and is design, and that everyone is a designer. Human-centered design is the practice of addressing and solving challenges, not just with people or end users in mind, but often alongside those same users. Design thinking is the process by which designers arrive at and often co-create human-centered solutions to those challenges. So if you're interested in changing up the way you perceive and understand challenges and ultimately arrive at solutions, and you're specifically intrigued by considering a more empathetic approach in this time of great disruption, this session will be a great introduction to human-centered design, design thinking, and using design principles to help you reimagine your organization, your career, or your own life. Rachel Switzky is the inaugural director of the Siebel Center for Design. She has been a global design leader working with Fortune 100 companies over the past 20 years. Most recently, she has served as an executive director at IDEO, the company who pioneered the concept of design thinking. And in this role, she helped teams imagine futures and then put them into action, focusing on digital design, emerging technologies, and impact at scale. Please join me in welcoming Rachel Switzky. We will turn the slides over to Rachel now.
Thanks, Karen. Let me get my deck up. Okay, and then let me just get. Oh, I want to do that. I want to show that and hide that. Okay, that's much better. Okay, hi everybody. I am Rachel Switzky. Thanks for joining our discussion today. Where it's just an introduction to design thinking and helping you understand some tools and some case studies that help visualize the process of design thinking and human-centered design. So just a little about me. So I became a college freshman back in 1988 at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and graduated in '93 with a degree in industrial design. And then I went into exhibition design to understand, like how is it that people move through space and how do you design for those needs? And I was at the Smithsonian then, the Smithsonian's National Design Museum in Cooper Hewitt. I was there for a couple of years and was kind of itching to continue my path as a designer. This was right at the bit of the beginning of the .com boom, and I came back to the University of Illinois to get my MFA in industrial design. And I started thinking about with the work that I was doing in at the Cooper Hewitt in understanding how people move through physical space. If we started looking at the ways that people would be moving through virtual space of the internet, how do you apply design into understanding that? So focused my attention in my MFA doing that, and then went on to a big digital agency after finishing up my master's, a place called Razorfish. And I was in Chicago, but I also spent a significant amount of time working in Europe as well, and working with Fortune 500 clients in designing a lot of their web presences early on in my career at Razorfish, but then later on at Razorfish, going into more of a systems design and thinking about more of systemic digital solutions that need to be understood and designed for people's needs as well. So then after Razorfish, I made my way to IDEO, which helped pioneer the concept of design thinking, and spent a little over a decade working in IDEO's, their headquarters in San Francisco in Palo Alto. And then heard about the Siebel Center for Design that was being established back at my alma mater at the University of Illinois. And it felt like it was a fun time in which to move from my 20 years of consulting and come back to where I started 30 years later, back at University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, to take the role as the inaugural director for Siebel Center for Design. So just a quick introduction to Siebel Center for Design. Our mission is to practice, model, and teach design thinking using human-centered design in order to reimagine our campus, our community, and our collective world. And what I need to do a lot in, with my socialization on campus is to just define human-centered design, so that there's many ways that we could define design thinking and human-centered design. So for the purpose of this discussion, I'm just going to introduce just the basics of human-centered design, which are these two categories of tools and practices, which is one about observing and one about empathy. And surrounding that, putting people at the center of our observation empathy, it allows us to understand people's needs and understand how it is that they are approaching their worlds, and how do we understand those contexts, and using the tools of observation, listening to them, asking the right types of questions to get them to open up, getting them to, talk about their worlds so that we can understand their worlds and not make assumptions about this. But then also looking at what it is that they do, because we could learn about their experiences by, they may aspirationally be saying something, but then doing something different. So what do we learn potentially from those tensions and differences? And then building on that, how do we now understand and make meaning of their motivations and their behaviors? And how is that we are able to get inside their heads to get an understanding about what is it that they're not saying, and what is it that they're not able to articulate, and what is it that could be these unmet needs that we need to draw out through these sessions of observation empathy exercises to truly get at these emotions and the way that people are, what are these emotional drivers to behaviors. And once we get an understanding of that, that makes it a little easier for us to then think about opportunity areas for design to have more impact in people's worlds, and to design experiences and products and services, roles and responsibilities, whatever we want to apply design thinking into. It helps us then understand how we design for people to make their lives better. I am going to move now into just explaining what we mean in this process of design thinking. I'm just going to close my door. My dog walked in. Open my door, excuse me for a moment. So when we talk about design thinking, I talked a lot about observations, and what we don't want to do is take things and take our what we look at in observations at face value in a superficial way. We don't want to say, oh, we observed this out in the field research, and we now see a solution. That's a very superficial level of understanding and empathy exercises. And what we want to do is go deeper. And in order to go deeper, it requires us to go more abstract through the process and take our time in learning and understanding what it is that we're seeing as we talk to people. So, with qualitative research sessions, we start building up insights, we start building up patterns, we see these emergent themes that appear through our sessions with people. And we start synthesizing that. We start trying to, like, again, make meaning and understanding about what it is that we're learning, and why are we seeing this? What's coming out about this? So as we go further down our process of investigation and synthesis, it goes even more abstract. But there's all sorts of frameworks that can be used and lots of tools to begin processing and organizing what it is that we're learning. And through those frameworks of understanding, it starts clicking into place, and it starts making sense of what it is that we have learned through our observations and empathy exercises, in that it brings it down into a grounding of design principles, of like, what is it that foundationally we've understood about this type of, this type of scenario. We've understood these types of behavioral personas, and we can start organizing opportunity areas for design based off of these learnings. And that starts formulating our design strategy, which can then help us not look at just one potential solution, but it could be outlining a whole ecosystem of solutions and solution sets, and helping us go above and beyond perhaps just a pure observation to a solution, but looking at potential innovations that we may not have considered if we hadn't gone through this process and patience of learning and understanding and continuing to investigate why are people doing this? Why are we and how do we bring in information in order to understand it and get to that level of insight? So if we move on to several tools that I want to introduce here, this is about, like, how is it that we are, we want to connect with people, and we want to understand these, their lives, their interests, their motivations, and that this gives us this, this content to then use as a jumping off point to then design for. So I have 4 different tools I'm just going to introduce here and help you, use this. They're very basic, and they should be, quite easy to adapt in any type of situation. But the first one is just walk in their shoes. And, we don't want to make assumptions about the people that we're designing for. And the closer we can get to their experiences, the better off we are into, again, understanding their worlds. So to walk in their shoes is to, how can we be a fly on the wall? How can we shadow? How can we shop along with the people that we are designing for, in order to truly watch what they're doing, and not talk to them in like a focus group in some sort of, nondescript conference room, but really be out there with it, with experiencing their lives with them. So this particular example is one of my former colleagues, Denise. We had a project where we were trying to understand nurses' day-to-day lives, and how it is that we could be improving upon their worlds. So Denise and the team, they suited up, and they spent several weeks just shadowing and being nurse aides for the most part. Not being able to like sign records and things like that, but just really observing and understanding the lives of nurses. And they picked up on and mapping out the journey of a nurse's day-to-day life, seeing that there's this point of opportunity around the nurse knowledge exchange, which is happening when a nurse is going off shift and another nurse is coming on shift. And that we recognize that, behaviorally, there are some, a nurse is tired at the end of the shift, a nurse has been well rested at the beginning of their shift, and there's a bit of shorthand and reliance on memory about that exchange of information per patient data. So the nurses would walk, they would share that information, and then the nurse that was tired would leave, and the nurse that was coming on board would take over. But we noticed that information was being dropped, and that there was, again, with that reliance on memory, was there an opportunity to help the nurses with that exchange, to actually just put in some very small prompts and tools that would allow them to be more thorough and not just be reliant on memory, which, it's good to rely on memory, but there's always ways that we can be supportive of that. So by building in some of these and prototyping some of these new types of experiences to support, which literally was prototyping, nothing fancy, no fancy technology. It was like a whiteboard that had checklists and ways that, little cards that we were developing with the nurses that could just make sure they could just turn over a card when they covered that topic per patient. And there's little things like that made that nurse knowledge exchange and that shift process just that much more effective, and improving upon that and giving the nurses tools that they could continue to prototype on their own. And it wasn't something where it required lots and lots of technological advancement, but more of what are ways that they could continue to iterate based on their own learnings. But again, walking in their shoes allowed us to pull upon just things that they were not even recognizing and that they could not articulate, or maybe not even talk about, like admitting to being tired and wanting to go home. Things like that are just, it's complete healthy and human behavior, and it allowed us to see as we put ourselves into those environments. So then another way to put ourselves into people's environments is to be an anthropologist. So again, taking a little bit more of a step back and not, just in the same way with like being within those experiences and walking in their shoes, we want to kind of understand the situation and get a sense of, like, again, what's happening when we are placing ourselves in an environment and understanding people's behaviors. In this particular case, we were working with Bath Toy Company. And they were looking at, Rubber Ducky 2.0 and what could that be, and designing for that experience, and really going right to that solution and having a lot of assumptions around what would be good for their market. And we said, that's a good idea. Let's put a pin in that, and let's spend some time with the caretakers to understand opportunities around bath time in general. So they said, that sounds good, sign us up. And we spent time in situations like this, where we're sitting with parents in the bathtub and caretakers, and just seeing what bath time is like, and hearing what parents and caretakers had to say. And in this is a very typical example of a mother kind of crouched in the corner. The kids are bathing, and she's telling us it's end of her day. And she's after work, and she's this is the best time of her day. She's able to spend with her kids, and it's a very bonding moment, and very this is where the bath time, and then goes into story time, goes into the nighttime, putting to bed, and we're listening, but we're also watching, and we're looking at the caretakers' faces, and we're looking at where it is that they're crouched. And this parent is very very a good example of what we saw over and over again, which was a very tired, exhausted parent who probably just needs more of a glass of wine than anything else. And that it's not that we didn't believe that they thought this was a bonding moment. We saw an opportunity of how do we make this a little easier for the parent, as opposed to looking for opportunities in terms of bath toys for the kids. So we're looking at where the parents are crouched, but there's no place to sit in the bathroom. We're looking at the parents' arms, and you can see with the way that the shower door closes and her arms, you can just imagine that we've all can just feel it. There's like a little line forming inside her skin as her arms perched over there. It's just not very comfortable. So we saw this over and over again as these patterns emerged. And we, just being anthropologists of like things that the people were not saying, but that we're able to observe and be able to go back to our client and say, you know what, Rubber Ducky 2.0, sure, that's a great idea. However, we actually opened up another opportunity here, and could we create some sort of stool or way that we can provide a lot more support for the parent during the bathing experience? So again, we wouldn't have seen that or known that unless we had spent time in bath time and taking the time to observe and talk to people and see what it is, what could be helping their experiences of bonding and making that more pleasurable. The third tool I have is looking at extremes. And we, again, when we, those observations not going directly to solutions, this goes into that idea of we are looking for extremes in scenarios, in that we are looking for inspiration for our design processes. And that's where we're getting an understanding from the bell curve. We're designing for the middle of the bell curve. That's where the biggest market's going to be, the biggest bang for our buck in terms of who it is that we're designing for. But on each end of this bell curve, there's going to be the 99th percentile and the 1 percentile. And any of us on this class right now, anyone you know could be an extreme user depending on whatever the scenario is. It's just more a matter of how is it that you're positioned within this context. So an extreme user is somebody who either is way on the trendy, emergent behaviors of newness, and that's over in this, on one end of the spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum is someone who's so far away from that emergent behavior. There could be lots of barriers or challenges in the way, or they're not even thinking about it. And one example could be in terms of cord cutting. And people not having cable anymore. So that there were people who were, you hear of cord cutters where they canceled their cable subscriptions and they started plugging their computers into their TV sets, and then watching TV through their internet. And before this was even established as streaming services, as like Netflix and Hulu, which are now very, Apple TV. I mean, those were not services that were provided, but there were a lot of extreme users who were hacking together those solutions many years ago. And then there's, on the other end of the spectrum are the people who were like still have cable TV, and they're not letting go of that yet. And they're not cutting the cord yet. And we want to understand, why, what might be preventing them, what's going to be, or what will be the way to make them change their behaviors. In that we're also looking at of people who are on the extreme, what is even on the horizon for them, and where directionally is the trend going. So even getting those both extremes is giving us inspiration back into our processes, so that we're keeping we're understanding the behaviors from like this emergent perspective and the challenge perspective, but then feeding that into our process of design for innovation, for keeping things fresh, for thinking about what might be next, so that if we're designing something, how are we building that into our process for the middle of our bell curve. So that said, an example we had here is, as an extreme, I gave an example of just the cable cutter, but this man was part of our research when we were working with a consumer products good company around the, again, not the bathtub experience, but in tooth care. So again, the bathroom experience. So in tooth care, we were looking at opportunities for different types of ways in which for toothbrushing and mouthwash and dental care and so on and so forth. So from an extreme, we were looking at extremes. We're looking at people who brush 3 times a day and floss 3 times a day, and they have different toothbrushes for every after every meal. They've got different brands, and they're just like they have 10 different types of flossing, and have extreme behaviors around that. But on the other end of the spectrum, it's not that this man here didn't brush his teeth. We decided we wanted to talk to people who didn't have any teeth, or who were lacking teeth, and we wanted to understand, if you didn't have any teeth, how did you take care of your mouth, and how did you take care? What was the dental care solution in that type of circumstances? So it's just, again, bringing us information, inspiration of these extremes, and understanding that he uses warm water in order to cleanse his gums. But another thing we learned in talking with him is that we learned a lot about just the importance of smiling and the communication, and how it is that you communicate with the world, and how him feeling very shy and very isolated from the world by not being able to communicate well, because he was worried about him not having teeth and being very judged on that. So again, we're not designing for people who don't have teeth, but talking to somebody in his circumstance allowed us to get more empathy around what does it even mean? What does dental care even mean at an extreme perspective? And bringing in that sensitivity and that understanding into our design process it was important for us to be thinking about that in all sorts of different ways. So the last one I have here is, as a tool, is again, looking at leveraging analogous settings. So I'm talking a lot about like, how is it that we're just like understanding people's situations, but how is it that we are also gathering information as inspiration to continue to feed our process? We're looking for the not obvious solutions, but going beyond that to help us in terms of innovation and gathering information that provides that inspiration in ways that we just hadn't considered or thought of. So the one way we could do that is leveraging analogous settings. So another healthcare example is we were asked to look at emergency room care and looking at the way it is that they could be improving, a hospital system could be improving upon their emergency room experience. So again, we could be anthropologists, we could be walk in their shoes, spend time here, understand ways that this could be organized better, what could the lighting be, what's the patient experience, you know, how is it that the team works together in the emergency room, what's the check-in process, that type of thing. So we're doing all, we're getting, you know, check, 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 check. We're doing all that type of qualitative research that's very important to this process. However, we wanted to go outside the box and we thought, what are some analogous examples that we could be researching that could bring in similar types of qualities of this experience? So thinking about kind of a choreography of a team, thinking about, you know, a very like time-based, very stressful experience here, what would be another example that we could look at outside of this industry that could help us in thinking about what is it that they're doing and what can we learn from that? And that's what led us to a NASCAR pit crew and understanding that the patient in this case is the car. There is, you know, as they are, you know, as they're servicing the car, the pit crew has all sorts of different types of roles and responsibilities. So us coming in and observing this to get an understanding of how they communicate with one another, how they stay out of each other's ways, how do they communicate with the driver, how does that all work, and how can we take those learnings and apply it into the emergency room experience? So one of the big key learnings we learned one of the big insights we learned in this, in looking at this particular analogous example to the emergency room experience was, again, that communication to the patient, to the driver. How does the driver know when to drive off? And there's one person on the pit crew that we learned was their only job was to look at everybody on the team and then look at the driver. And that they would stand there and each person as they finished their job would give like a signal, give a thumbs up to that one person who's standing off to the side. The driver there's so much craziness going on, the driver is locked eyes with that person. When the driver sees that that person gives him or her the thumbs up because they've gotten the thumbs up from everybody else, that's when they can drive off. So that communication and roles and responsibilities was quite interesting to us, in that we were able to take that, that learning and apply it as a suggestion to the emergency room redesign project. In the, you know, in an analogous example of there's so much craziness going on when there's an emergency happening, and there's usually a friend or a family member that has come along with the patient, and they don't know what's going on, and there's too much and it's too crazy, and they're trying to understand and they're getting really upset. So we suggested, can you put in like a caretaker or friend advocate that can understand and explain and be that translator in that experience? And can that help out with what's going on here? And having that role be very much trained to be that communicator. But again, we wouldn't have thought about that really unless we had seen this, this example in a NASCAR pit crew. So I can pause there for a moment if anyone has any specific questions. I've got like 3 more examples of design thinking in practice that I wanted to help illustrate that I think really makes the, you know, the process come alive. But I just want to say, does anyone have any questions at this moment? No.
Rachel, I have an actual question from my experience right now. Do you always start with observations, or do you ever start with a hypothesis and look for data to prove or disprove that hypothesis?
Yeah, Karen, that's a great question. And it's when I started at IDEO back in in 2007, we were using a process of blank page, mind of a child. We're going to look at this fresh and new. And we found that that was wasting time in the process to get ideas to market faster, because we were taking too much time to be thinking about things that potentially had already been thought about. So we started adding into our process a concept called design from day one, which is exactly what you're saying, which is a brain dump of what do we think the answer is? If we were going to have a starting point of ideas and biases and like assumptions, let's just get that all out on day one. And what does that now give us in terms of, we synthesize even on day one what that could be? What are the themes that come out of that process? And can we use that as, again, that stake in the ground of initial ideation? And then as we go through our process of abstraction and making meaning, as I showed, doing the observations and so on and so forth, and we diverge from our initial hypotheses, we need to synthesize and converge on a set of insights. And what's really powerful is that it's awesome to see where did we start and how has this iterative process, you know, brought us to another set of assumptions and hypotheses from our starting point. And not to say that it's like completely throwaway, we're not going to use that at all. It's more of, what have we learned that has now evolved that initial brain dump of assumptions and ideas? And then just design process and human-centered design is literally just continuing to iterate on those, where you've landed based off of that, you know, those insights that you've collected. And how does that continue to feed into your process of, if we've now iterated into and evolved our ideas to this point, looking at that and getting an understanding of what are some of the gaps, what are, you know, how can we now inform this? This is our new set of assumptions. If we did another divergent, of more research or starting to prototype ideas, what is it that our learning goals are, and how do we now build these, build our process in with, generating ideas with users, whatever it might be. But yes, design from day one is essential. And just, we have, I mean, it's me search when you're starting with what your ideas are, and you really need to go beyond that. But it's a fine starting point, and it's as opposed to just starting with a blank page.
Thanks, Rachel.
Your thing. Any other questions right now?
It looks like we can go ahead and move on.
Okay. I'll move ahead and I'll just talk about, I have a couple examples here. This one is not one of my projects, but I think it's a really nice example of human-centered design. And this is an MRI. And typically when people are have been prescribed or have been asked to get an MRI, I mean, something's medically wrong that needs to be diagnosed. So people get an MRI in order to, get those fancy X-rays in order to help the doctor understand what might be going on. So an MRI is very noisy. It's you have to lie very still. It's scary. They're scary. It's just the whole experience is scary. So the Siemens designers who created this took that all into consideration, and talked to people before they're getting an MRI, got really started very much understanding and empathizing on that stress. And they've now pulled that together in how do we de-stress the situation. So you can see the curvilinear nature of the product. You can see the glow of the blues. You can see that the calming nature that they have designed into this experience is very much about de-stressing the situation and trying to get a sense of how do we give people more of a sense of calmness as they're going through this experience. And they've succeeded. I mean, it's like, I'm a trained industrial designer. This is a beautiful object, beautiful medical device. I believe they won awards on this. I mean, it's gorgeous. However, they were very surprised to see, as a child was walking into using this, this design language did not speak to a child. Children, this is terrifying. They're crying. They're not. This is not signaling calm to a child. So they went back to the drawing board to think about, all right, we've designed this from an adult perspective. If we were to design this from a child perspective, what's going to be a calming situation for a child? And they designed this. And they decided, hey, you know what, we're going to make this a playful experience. And that is that something that will be much much better as a resolution for de-stressing a situation with a child who has to go through this. And it works. This is something where there's a story arc here where you have to lay really quiet, but you'll hear the pirates overhead. When the pirates are gone, you'll be able to get the pirate, booty. You'll win at the end. It becomes a game, and it's just it's different motivations and desires and unmet needs for different audiences. But they're using the exact same, insides. It's still an MRI. It still does the same activity, but it's just designed for different audiences. And thinking again about the needs of those audiences, this is a very stark descriptor of what could those scenarios look like if you are designing for these different needs. Another example, this is a project that I did at IDEO, one of my teams did at IDEO, which is around a defibrillator with Philips. And you see these public defibrillators, you'll see them out in public areas, you'll see them in restaurants and museums and out there. And it's for an emergency when someone's having, a heart attack or some type of, heart issue. How do we make this as simple to use as possible in an emergency? So Philips came to us and they said, we've improved upon the design and we made it so that we're trying to simplify it so that we can make it even easier for people to use in an emergency. So we found that it's actually, you only need 2 steps now in order to hit the button and send the electric current. And so we think, if it's 2 steps, that'll save some time. And then we also found that there's these pads that you put on someone's body. Before it needed to be in these very specific places, but Philips' team was excited. They redesigned this. It's now, people can put them anywhere. And we feel that that's going to be easier now for people to not worry about that in an emergency. So we said, okay. So they said, can you now redesign this to make it more effective now using these new technological achievements that we've made? So we said, great, let's go, we'll prototype this, we'll go test this out and see how it works. That can inspire how we design it. So we found that people are conditioned, North American market, people are conditioned on a 1, 2, 3 mechanism. This is something that we rely upon on these intuitions in an emergency situation, that when it was 1, 2 steps and then hit the button, people were very much thrown off, and that we needed to actually put in a fake 3rd step so that it fit in with what they were culturally conditioned to go 1, 2, 3, hit the button. So we had to tell Philips, it's great that you streamlined it, but we have to put a fake step in there in order to accommodate people being able to use this efficiently, because you're actually throwing them off. And then secondly, with the pads, putting the pads anywhere on someone's chest was also very stressful for people. In an emergency situation, people don't want to mess up, and they need that coaching and guidance. And with them knowing that they did it right, then they know that they have much more confidence in hitting the button 1, 2, 3. So we said to the Philips client, we need to tell people exactly where to put this. And Philips is like, but you can put it anywhere. It doesn't matter. Again, people are conditioned in an emergency situation. They get really nervous and scared, and they want to be told what to do, which is why you see on the illustration, oh, you have to put it right here, and you got to put it right here. Again, that's made up. It doesn't matter. But we needed to design that into the system in order to accommodate the effective use of this product in that emergency situation. So again, these assumptions that people have, this is designed from day one, Karen, as we were just discussing, we have assumptions about what could be useful, but then in actuality, it needs to match people's perceptions of their world. And in the context of that use, what is there, within an emergency context, things might switch and change in terms of what people's behavior needs are. And then lastly, last example I have here is a product that a team did at IDEO, which is around looking for opportunity areas for improving the pill bottle and the design of the pill bottle experience and medication taking. So we were looking at just the, the opening up of pills along with the other other aspects of the experience. And to look to extremes, we wanted to talk to people who had mobility issues. So we recruited in our user research, we recruited people who had rheumatoid arthritis. So again, their grip was not so great. And we knew they'd be on some medications. So we went into people's homes to conduct our research. And one of the people that we were interviewing in her home had terrible rheumatoid arthritis, and we were very happy to be talking to her to get an understanding about her experiences. But we said, so tell us about your experience in opening up pill bottles, and she was like, I have no problem with this, and we were like, that doesn't make any sense. We were kind of like, what? No. The whole purpose of this is that we have to understand on what is it that you've adapted, how are you, what is your experience in doing this, so that we can understand. And she's like, I don't have any problems with this. And we said, all right, show us. You need to show us how you open your pill bottles up. So she starts walking, and we thought she was going to lead us to her medicine cabinet in her bathroom, but she led us to her kitchen, and she showed us how it is that she was opening up her pill bottles, which, as you can see, is not very safe. But when she says that she had no problem, she figured out a way that she could open them up, which was carving them off with a very sharp blade. And again, thinking about that extreme nature of, she could not, they were so difficult to open that she had to go to a very extreme method. It's the same with like the person we talk with no teeth. It's not like we're gonna, this doesn't give us an ultimate solution here, but it opens up our minds as people who are designing for these experiences on what it takes to understand people's behaviors, and understanding that what they might say is, she's like, it's easy. If she'd written that down on some survey form, it just would have been like, tossed off. But us being actually able to see like what she says, but what she does, and how that brings it into context, the needs of people that we're designing for, I really can't think of a stronger illustration. So I'll stop there. That's the end of my presentation, and I just wanted to again open it up for discussion. I'll stop my share here and see if anyone has any specific questions that you'd like around this process. On the how you apply this into projects. Ask me anything at this moment.
We have a question from Holly. Are there any good books for this subject at a really high level?
There's, there are so many materials online that if you are, there's so many aspects of design thinking and human-centered design. I'm trying to think of anything off the top of my head. There might be people in this room who've done this research. There's, if you look at, I'm trying to think of like, if you just type in human-centered design, and you're going to find Medium articles, you're going to find lots and lots of people who are sharing their knowledge around this, and again, it's at a really high level. Like I've given you a very high level, and it's more like if you want to drill down into the process, there's lots of things. Karen, can I compile and then send them to you? And
that would be great. Yeah.
Let me do that, because I'm unprepared, because there's so many ways we could go with that. I will get this resource list to you to send to this group.
Fantastic.
I hope that'll be helpful, Holly. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll get that to you.
I have another question. What is the most surprising result that you've encountered in any of your design projects?
Most surprising result.
Other than the lathe to open a pill bottle.
I think there's so many ways to answer that, and I think just with my immediate response is in my 20 years of consulting and the process and approach highlighting trends and future trends of innovation, and just being like surprised and shocked about how difficult it is for companies to take on board these insights and set themselves up for success to support innovation. And having seen, as spending 20 years in innovation consulting and seeing all these future trends, we were, it's just part of the business. And then seeing that your client does not move forward with what you've uncovered. And then, lo and behold, 18 months later, you'll see that, there's no secret sauce here. This is just a process that if you go through it, you will uncover insights that you can apply. And it depends on how far out you're looking from a future perspective. But you'd say like 18 months later, you'd see a competitor launching, because it's like, this is not like, magic. Anyone can find these insights if you're asking the right questions and and focusing the right ways in the design challenge. So over and over again, I would see so many clients just get bypassed by the competition, because the competition invested in the same type of research and found the same types of ideas. And while my client may have not done anything, their competitor did, and leapfrogged over and disrupted the industry. And I think that it was funny to me, because again, as a consultant, you don't own anything. So we would be like, yeah, you should be doing this. This is what people are doing now. These are the behaviors. And either it being poo-pooed or, oh, it's too difficult, or whatever the reasons may be for not kind of moving forward. It's just, you just see something come out and you're like, yeah, I'm not surprised that came out. And it's just, like, yeah, I really saw that. It's just very, it's fascinating to see that. Really, really interesting.
What was the percentage? Like, was it more than half the time they would not act on the recommendations?
It would be, it depends on how risk averse a client was. And if a client, like, you'd see that there'd be some pieces of a strategy that they would pull in. Mm-hmm. And then there'd be pieces that because there was maybe low hanging fruit, easy stuff to maybe integrate. But just in order to support innovation and disruption, you have to be fairly, talk about what a book is, Creative Confidence by David Kelly and Tom Kelly. You have to have creative confidence in order to make these decisions, to organize your organization to support innovation and support changes, and be okay with cannibalizing different types of your industry for new industry. And there's all sorts of, that's a whole other conversation, a whole other lecture. But I would say it's hard to say if it's like, oh yeah, 50% of my clients never moved on anything. It's more of like, they would take some piece of it. It was just very painful to see that the people, like our immediate stakeholders who were believing in it, had very difficult time getting it through their processes.
We've had a couple more questions come in. From Will, we have, how do you address the mindset of a client or a stakeholder that says this process takes too long and they already have a pretty good idea of what they want the solution to be?
Yeah, I think that it's a matter of, a lot of design thinking process. I mean, maybe it takes 6 months, but maybe it could take 6 days. I mean, the minimum viable project that I had at IDEO was like a 3-week design sprint. And if you can just take 3 weeks, and there's the design sprint agile process that I think someone from Google Ventures has published. There's another resource and book for you, Holly. But that, it's even 3 days, you could just spend a little bit of time talking to people and observing. And again, doing that brain dump of like, if you have a pretty good idea what it is, hey, here, if you think of this, let's get that out. Let's try it out. Let's do some generative research just to understand, or maybe some generative value research, so that we can try to validate, but maybe try to open up the conversation as well to newer solutions. And I think it can be a very, very minimal amount of investment to just go talk to people and spend a day talking to people, and then spend another day debriefing, and then another day then conceptualizing based off those insights. That can then be, that's a 3-day process. A 3-week process would be spend a week talking to people and looking at analogous experiences, and then spend a week kind of debriefing and synthesizing, and another week of pulling together ideas based off of your findings. So it's something that doesn't have to take too long, and it's very, very worthwhile in the investment.
Very good. A question from Howard: design thinking has had such a positive impact on so many product categories, but which industries have really lagged that would really benefit from it?
Oh, geez. Let's see. What industries really lag? I hate to say academia.
Oh, no.
It's interesting, I can think I'm thinking, right, there's case studies of like the recording industry where you can see they're just kicking and screaming going into like digital transformation, looking at healthcare industry, kicking and screaming, you look at the cable industry, you just think of anything that's like, it's curious to see, like, I'm always thinking about like, who's going to be disrupted next? And like looking at just, like looking at I don't know if anyone saw, there was a really interesting animation over the last several months where it was showing like the last like 15, 30 years of the, Fortune 50, and is showing how like the old was replaced by the new industry and the technology industry. Just quite interesting to see, and thinking about this adaptation and acceptance of innovation, but then also thinking like, how do you stay on your toes even if you're at the top of the market? And how do you allow yourself to continue to innovate and not become like the Polaroid or the newspaper or the cable company or whatever that's like these dying industries that that just weren't able to pivot or move forward as quickly as others. I don't know if I answered your question very well. Another question here says, what resources do you personally use to research the trends of innovation? I've drunk the Kool-Aid. It's all part of my DNA now. I just observe my world constantly. And starting from like 1988 when I was being taught how to understand users back in my industrial design degree, just that refinement over how many years to just observe your world and get an understanding of like, what are people talking about? How are people working with one another? What are things that you're seeing in terms of just even within your own community, your own household, your own, immediate family or extended family, or, what are behaviors that you see, at the grocery store? And I'm just, my mind is constantly just like tracking it and seeing and understanding what are some of these things that and again, if you, just as I don't have any children, but just like interacting with my niece and seeing her grow up and seeing the behaviors of these, these future generations, in my mind right now is thinking about how is the pandemic affecting, we're looking at like the millennials and Gen Z. And I think there's going to be an immediate new group that is having to adapt, that Gen Z is not a very big group we're looking at. And that's going to be, it's going to be the Gen COVID or something on that new group that's up and coming in terms of what their behaviors are in reaction, extreme reaction to just what's happening now culturally and historically within our country. That's what I'm looking at right now. I'm just trying to see where am I getting hints of that? Where are we starting to see some of those behaviors and what's going to be happening? So that's what I use. Let's see. I see typically business leadership wants to know what business metric will be moved by a certain dollar amount. What's a good way to estimate potential business value of the insights from the research? I mean, that is, we designed a role at IDEO called business designer. So it was people who had that kind of business perspective that would be integrated into the design process in order to kind of keep that perspective in mind and how it is that we needed to communicate to business leadership. And having that person do the business analogous examples doing the competitive landscaping, doing some modeling that was married to a lot of the insights that we were coming up with, and starting to use that from a business perspective to do exactly what you're suggesting here, and showing that business value that could communicate in, in dollars and cents, or communicate in some scenarios that could be imagined based on what we understood these emerging insights, but also activities that we would do called looking in, that would be us understanding the organizations and how they ticked, so that we could, at IDEO, marry and match our solutions to that organization. Because it wouldn't make any sense if we came up with some ideas based on what an organization asked us to look at that didn't match what their organizational structure was, or us understanding what could be some modifications or builds within the organizational structures to support these new ideas. So it is about kind of taking that lens, and again, having a multidisciplinary teams helping one another to provide those types of insights for those different perspectives of outcomes that need to communicate to different stakeholders and audiences within your own team or an executive team, or if you're coming at it from an internal perspective or consulting perspective. And then Susan, do you have any tips for how to best keep the iterative process going? Yeah, I think it's more like, I guess in here, in terms of, there's different ways to think about this in terms of projects being stalled. I think it's, if you need to kind of like, kind of revisit the, the initial value propositions of what you came up with, and kind of like, like dusting it off and looking at like where you landed, and kind of revitalizing it with maybe a quick analysis of the of like where, like what would be, just kind of going through some internal motions of where do the design challenges as stated, or the how might we statements that have come out of the initial opportunity areas, if we were to revisit them, are they still relevant? And if they're not, this is again that just start design from day one. How do we think they need to change? Or bring in like new people to come and review and take a look at what it is that where you landed, if there's been a pause on it. Just having kind of some fresh perspective is always really good. I think just staying fresh and motivated and creative is to, sometimes you need to take a step back. And I think reflection is a huge part of the design thinking process, where it's like, if you just take a step back, or again, bring in somebody else to review, or again, bring in, like, maybe I need to talk to somebody else to have me think about this in a different way, is always really important. I think we've got like, yeah, we're at the end. Oh, this is
we are. Our time is running out. And before I let everyone go, I do want to say thank you so much to Rachel Switzky of the Siebel Design Center at University of Illinois. And I would like to take a chance to remind everybody of the upcoming events. We have these webinars every Wednesday. Next week, we're going to have a job search panel with 4 career coaches from a variety of different schools, and an independent career coach. On the 21st, we'll have Systems in the Age of Big Data and Fast Networks with Professor Balaji Vamanan. And on the 28th, we'll have part 2 of our cybersecurity talk, Security Threats and Mitigation, with Professor Venkatakrishnan. So please join us for any or all of those sessions. And thank you, Rachel. I love this topic, and I hope you all were able to get some really interesting insights that you can apply to your careers. So we're going to go ahead and shut off the
great
video.
Thank you. Feel free to reach out.